5 years ago, the narrator had a 6-month emotional affair that her husband recently discovered. She reflects on whether betrayal has levels, depending on its type, emotional versus physical, context, and circumstances. She regrets lying when confronted, which worsened her husband's pain, and she empathizes with how devastating betrayal can feel. She also questions whether emotional abuse, like yelling at a vulnerable partner, is as harmful as betrayal. She concludes that betrayal and other hurts should be judged with nuance, as the details and context significantly affect their impact.
All right, so welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be talking about betrayal.
Ooh, that's a juicy one.
Yeah, it is, and we're going to be specifically looking at whether there are, like, quote-unquote, levels to it, you know?
Levels to betrayal.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm interested.
Yeah, so this whole thing is inspired by this one woman's account. It's a very personal account of infidelity in her own marriage.
Wow, okay.
And before we kind of jump into the nitty-gritty, I do just want to say that this is obviously a very sensitive topic.
For sure?
And the goal here is not to, like, judge anyone,
No, absolutely not.
but rather to just, like, try to understand the different perspectives that are presented in the source material.
Yeah, just kind of see where she's coming from and how she's thinking about this.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, so in this woman's account, she reveals that she had a 6-month emotional affair
Okay.
5 years ago, and her husband, he just recently found out about it. So yeah, it's pretty heavy stuff, and she's clearly, like, struggling with a lot of guilt, but she's also kind of questioning the societal norms around how we, like, define betrayal. You know?
Okay, yeah, I can see how that would come up.
Yeah, and, like, one of the first things she asks is, like, aren't there levels to betrayal?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Right.
Yeah, it is, and I think it speaks to that human need to, like, categorize things, right?
Yeah.
To try to make sense of difficult experiences.
Totally, yeah.
And what's interesting to me is how she uses this question to then explore, like, whether certain types of betrayal are more or less forgivable than others.
Exactly. Yeah, and she gets really specific about the factors that she believes come into play. She distinguishes between emotional and physical infidelity.
Right, the classic debate.
I know, right? Like, which one is worse? Is one inherently worse than the other?
It's a tough one.
Yeah, is it, like, the act itself, or is it the emotional intent behind it that really constitutes betrayal?
Yeah.
It's hard to say.
Totally.
And then she also brings up the duration and the frequency of
Right.
the betrayal. So, like, a one-time lapse in judgment, that might feel very different from, like, a sustained pattern of deception.
For sure. Like, was it just a slip up, or is this something that was, like, ongoing and intentional?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like she's urging us to consider the full context of the situation. You know?
Yeah, to look beyond just the act itself and really understand all the nuances involved.
Totally. And then she also throws out this question. She asks, would it matter if my husband had a one-night stand during a time when I was, like, emotionally distant? Would it somehow be less hurtful because I wasn't meeting his needs?
Ooh, that's a loaded question.
I know, right?
Yeah, it is.
It's a tough one, and it really got me thinking, like, is she trying to, like, shift blame here? Or is there a legitimate point here about how, like, relationship dynamics can contribute to vulnerability?
It's a tricky area to navigate, for sure, but I think she's tapping into something really important here, which is, this idea of attachment styles.
Oh, interesting.
The way we respond to betrayal is often influenced by, like, our early childhood experiences and the ways we learn to connect with others. So, for example, someone with an anxious attachment style, they might be more sensitive to any perceived threats to the relationship, which could lead to, like, heightened feelings of betrayal, even in situations that, others might consider less severe.
That's a really good point. Yeah, and she even brings up the relationship to the other person involved in the betrayal. So she feels particularly guilty in this case because her affair was with a married man.
Oh, wow.
So it's like it's adding another layer of, like, wrongness to the whole situation.
Yeah, the ripple effects are even bigger in that case.
Exactly. It's like she's acknowledging that her choices didn't just impact her husband, but, like, also another family.
Yeah, it becomes a much more complicated web of relationships.
Totally. Yeah. And then she wonders if the impact would be different if the marriage was already kind of on shaky ground
Okay. Interesting.
versus being like seemingly happy.
So is it less of a betrayal if the relationship was already strained?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
That's a tough one.
Yeah, and it kind of brings up this idea of how we tend to view betrayal through like the lens of our own experiences, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Our individual expectations and what we consider to be like acceptable or unacceptable behavior in a relationship.
Totally. And then she makes this really interesting comparison. She compares betrayal to her husband's yelling,
Oh, okay.
which she considers a form of emotional abuse.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Yeah, she even points out that like he's never cheated on her.
Right.
So like does that automatically make him the quote unquote better person?
Hmm. This is where things get really nuanced, I think, because while it's obviously important to acknowledge that any form of abuse is damaging and unacceptable,
Yeah.
I think it's also crucial to understand that, like, the differences between them.
Okay, yeah.
So infidelity often involves this deliberate act of, like, deception
Right.
and a violation of, agreed upon boundaries.
Mm.
Whereas emotional abuse, that can manifest in much more subtle and even insidious ways,
Right.
sometimes even unintentionally.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's not always this like cut and dry black and white situation.
So what you're saying is that like while both can be deeply hurtful,
Mhm.
they stem from different motivations and they have different impacts on the relationship.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful.
Then while, this woman in the story, she seems to be using the comparison to kind of justify her own actions.
Right.
It's crucial that we don't fall into the trap of like minimizing or excusing any form of abuse.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's not about creating like a hierarchy of pain,
Right.
saying that one person's hurt is more valid than another's.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing that like complex interplay of emotions, intentions, and individual vulnerabilities,
Yes, exactly.
within a relationship.
Yeah,
And I think that's what makes this woman's account so fascinating, right?
totally.
Like she's not just sharing her story.
Right.
She's forcing us to confront some like really uncomfortable questions
Yes.
about how we define and how we judge betrayal.
Yeah. And I think that's a valuable exercise, even if it does leave us with, more questions than answers.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
So before we move on and kind of explore the psychology of betrayal a little bit deeper
Yeah.
and the complexities of relationship dynamics, I want to just pause for a second and ask you, the listener, a question.
Okay.
What stands out to you so far in this woman's story?
Yeah. What resonates with you?
What resonates with your own experiences or your understanding of this, this complex topic?
Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, let's know.
It's interesting how she brings up this idea of emotional abuse alongside infidelity.
Right.
Like, how do we even measure different types of harm in a relationship?
Yeah.
Can we really say that one is worse than the other?
Yeah, that's a really tough question.
It is.
And I appreciate that she's even bringing it to light.
Yeah.
It's like she's saying that just because her betrayal was like more visible,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't mean that it was the only or
Yeah.
even the most damaging hurt in their relationship.
Exactly. And this is where I think understanding the psychology of betrayal can be so helpful.
Okay.
Because while, infidelity is often seen as this like ultimate betrayal,
Right.
any action that really shatters that foundation of trust in a relationship can be deeply wounding.
Yeah, totally. So how do we even begin to untangle all of these different types of hurt? Like, is it even possible to compare them in a fair way?
Well, I think the key here is recognizing that we can't create like some sort of universal pain scale.
Yeah.
What might feel devastating to one person could be perceived very differently by someone else.
Totally.
And it all comes down to, those individual experiences and vulnerabilities.
Mm.
And going back to what we were talking about earlier, those attachment styles.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, like, for example, someone who has experienced gaslighting in the past, which
Yeah.
is like, a form of emotional abuse where someone is manipulating you into doubting your own sanity.
Right.
They might be hyper aware of any signs of manipulation in their current relationship.
Exactly. Yeah. And for them, experiencing even like subtle forms of emotional abuse, again, could be incredibly triggering.
Right.
And bring up a lot of past trauma.
Yeah.
It's not about saying that one type of pain is worse than another,
Right.
but understanding that the impact is deeply personal and shaped by this like complex web of individual factors.
Okay. So it sounds like while acknowledging those nuances of betrayal is important,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't diminish the pain of the person who feels betrayed.
Exactly. And I think it's crucial to remember here that the woman in this account, she acknowledges her husband's pain.
Right.
She's not trying to excuse her actions or downplay the impact of her infidelity.
Right.
She's simply asking us to consider the possibility of a more nuanced perspective
Yeah.
on a very complex issue.
It's a brave thing to do,
It is.
to put yourself out there like that.
Yeah.
Especially when you're facing the consequences of your actions, you
Yeah.
know. I think it highlights how quick we are to judge in these situations
Right.
without truly understanding the full context.
Absolutely. It's human nature to want to like categorize things as good or bad, right or wrong.
Yeah.
But relationships are messy.
They are.
And they rarely fit into like neat boxes,
Yeah. Yeah.
We often project our own values and experiences onto others, assuming that their reactions should align with our own.
Yeah, and that's why communication is so vital,
Yep.
If we can create a space for open and honest dialogue
Mm-hmm.
where both partners feel safe to express their feelings and their needs without
Yeah.
fear of judgment, that's where I think true understanding can begin.
It's about approaching these situations with empathy.
Yeah.
And a willingness to listen. It's not about condoning hurtful behavior, but
Yeah.
but recognizing the complexity of human relationships
Yeah.
and the many factors that contribute to both the highs and the lows.
I think this woman's story ultimately highlights that while betrayal can be incredibly painful,
Mm-hmm.
it can also be a catalyst for growth,
Yeah, that.
both within ourselves and in our relationships.
It's a powerful reminder that even in those darkest moments, there's always the potential for healing and transformation.
Totally.
But it requires a commitment to honesty, to compassion, and a willingness to embrace, the messiness of being human.
So if we were to apply this woman's insights to our own lives,
Yeah.
what would that look like? How can we cultivate a more nuanced understanding of betrayal in our own relationships and interaction?
Oh, I think it all starts with self-awareness,
Yeah.
taking the time to really reflect on our own values and experiences.
Right.
And those things that trigger us,
Mhm.
What are those non-negotiables in our relationships?
Yeah.
How do we typically respond to conflict
Right.
or when someone hurts us? And perhaps most importantly, are we willing to be honest with ourselves about our own capacity for both giving and receiving forgiveness?
Yeah, those are some really tough questions,
They are.
but essential ones if we want to build like healthy and resilient relationships.
Absolutely.
Because let's face it, betrayal in some form or another is almost inevitable in any close relationship.
Yeah, we're all human.
Right.
We make mistakes. The key is how we choose to respond to those mistakes. Yeah.
Both in ourselves and in others,
Yeah.
Do we react with anger and judgment?
Right.
Or do we approach the situation with curiosity and compassion?
And that brings us back to communication, being able to express our hurt and our disappointment
Mhm.
while also being open to hearing the other person's perspective.
Yeah, it's not easy,
Not at all.
but it's essential if we want to move forward in a way that strengthens the bond rather than tears it apart.
Really?
It's about finding that delicate balance between holding someone accountable for their actions,
Right.
but also recognizing their humanity.
Mm-hmm.
It's about understanding that forgiveness doesn't mean condoning the behavior,
Yeah.
but rather choosing to let go of that anger and resentment that can be so toxic.
Right. It's not about saying that betrayal is okay
Right.
or that it shouldn't hurt.
Yeah,
It's about recognizing that it's a complex issue with no easy answers
for sure.
and that the path to healing is often messy and unpredictable. Absolutely. And it's about remembering that we're all capable of both hurting and being hurt.
Right.
We all have the potential to betray and be betrayed.
Yeah.
The key is to approach these experiences with empathy,
Mhm.
with compassion, and a willingness to learn and grow from them.
This has been such an insightful conversation.
It has.
Before we move on to some final thoughts, we want to hear from you. What resonated with you the most today?
Yeah. What insights or questions have emerged for you as we've explored the complexities of betrayal and its impact on relationships?
This deep dive into betrayal has really given us all a lot to think about.
Yeah.
We've explored the gray areas, the challenges of comparing different types of harm, and the crucial role of communication and self-reflection. So,
Yeah.
what are your takeaways so far?
I think, going back to this woman's story, it really underscores that betrayal, while universally painful, can manifest in so many different ways.
Right.
And recognizing those nuances, it isn't about minimizing anyone's experience. It's about opening the door to a deeper understanding of ourselves,
Yeah.
our partners, and that intricate dance that is human connection.
I love that phrase, the intricate dance. It really captures the complexity.
It does.
Instead of getting stuck in the blame game,
Right.
we're encouraged to shift our perspective. Maybe instead of asking who's right and who's wrong,
Right.
because we're asking what led us here?
Yeah.
And how do we move forward?
Exactly. It's about fostering a more compassionate and constructive dialogue, even when dealing with, incredibly painful emotions.
This woman's story, while deeply personal, it offers such a valuable framework, I think, for navigating the complexities of betrayal in any relationship, really.
Yeah.
Whether it's romantic, familial,
Yeah.
even professional. So what are some of the key insights that we can apply to our own lives?
Well, I think first and foremost, it reminds us that trust, once broken, can be rebuilt. But it takes work.
Yeah.
It requires honesty, vulnerability, and a commitment to growth from all parties involved.
Yeah.
It also highlights, I think, the importance of setting clear boundaries,
Right.
communicating our needs effectively, and embracing that sometimes difficult act of forgiveness,
Right.
both for ourselves and for those who have hurt us.
It's so easy to get caught up in that hurt and anger, but
It is.
ultimately forgiveness is about freeing ourselves from those heavy emotions.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean condoning the action,
Right.
but rather choosing to let go of the resentment that can just poison a relationship.
Absolutely. And I think this conversation has also underscored the importance of understanding our own attachment styles.
Yeah.
Knowing how we tend to react in relationships,
Yeah.
what our triggers are, what our needs are, that can help us navigate challenging situations with more self-awareness and empathy.
Yeah, this has been an incredibly eye-opening journey.
It has.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question. Something to really ponder as you continue to navigate the complexities of your own relationships.
Okay.
So considering what we've learned about attachment styles and the various forms that betrayal can take, how might understanding your own attachment style help you anticipate potential challenges and build stronger, more resilient connections with the people you care about?
That's a great question.
Yeah, it's a question worth exploring, maybe even discussing with someone you trust.
I love that.
Because ultimately the path to healthy, fulfilling relationships is paved with self-awareness, compassion, and open communication.
I think that's a perfect note to end on.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.